Modern enterprise security architecture excels at maintaining a defensive perimeter. Firewalls and intrusion detection systems identify and block unauthorized inbound threats, shielding the internal network from direct external assault. But a completely sealed network is a non-functional network. To perform their daily duties, employees must continuously connect outward to access industry-sanctioned third-party websites, regulatory portals, and professional discussion boards. The structural vulnerability emerges when the return traffic from that explicitly trusted third-party site bypasses all perimeter defenses. In this scenario, the compromise is triggered entirely by the target's routine, required browsing behavior, rather than an attacker's aggressive inbound push. Traditional perimeter defense only guards the front door against known adversaries. It leaves the organization exposed to the trusted supply lines its employees use every day. This method of infiltration is known as a drive-by compromise or a watering hole attack. It functions as a strategic initial access vector, turning a single compromise of a trusted site into a point of entry for an entire professional community. Contrast this directly with phishing. It requires zero inbound malicious emails, no deceptive lures, and no attachments to scan. The trap is placed at a familiar destination, where the victim is already scheduled to go. This raises a critical question. How do advanced persistent threats consistently use this technique to bypass millions of dollars in enterprise security infrastructure? To understand the mechanics of this evasion, we must forensically deconstruct the 5 distinct phases of a watering hole attack. Understanding this threat requires shifting focus from network vulnerabilities to the exploitation of behavioral trust. This diagram illustrates the attacker's strategic pivot. State-sponsored actors rarely waste resources attacking a hardened enterprise directly. Instead, they begin Phase 1 by surveying the target's broader ecosystem. We see this pattern in high-profile incidents, such as the 2013 attack on the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations or the Holy Water campaign, which targeted sites frequently visited by Asian religious minorities. The attackers evaluate third-party domains using a precise calculus. They look for sites with high audience overlap with their intended target, but with significantly lower security maturity. Professional discussion boards, regulatory portals, and industry standard sites frequently fit these criteria, making them ideal staging grounds. Attackers compromise the weakest link in a target's digital orbit, establishing an external foothold to execute a silent ambush. Phase 2 is weaponization. Attackers inject malicious iframes, command and control redirection scripts, or exploit kits directly into the trusted site's legitimate code. To prevent the compromised site from appearing hostile to the general public, the attackers implement a technique known as selective delivery. They deploy strict IP range filtering, so the payload only executes when a connection request originates from the target organization's specific network. They layer this with advanced browser profiling scripts, like the Rice Curry profiler used by APT37, to fingerprint a visitor's system before serving the malicious code. If a visitor arrives with the wrong IP address or system parameters, the script remains dormant. The server simply delivers normal website content. Because the malware only materializes for the precise victim, it remains invisible to external security researchers and automated web scanners. This diagram shows Phase 3. Secure email gateways fail entirely because the delivery vector is the browser. There are no inbound links to analyze. Category-based and web reputation filters suffer a similar failure, as these systems rely on historical domain data to block malicious traffic. Because the compromised domain in a watering hole attack is a historically legitimate site with a high reputation score, filters wave the traffic straight through. And because of the selective delivery mechanisms established in Phase 2, cloud security engines never observe the malicious behavior required to change the site's categorization. The entire exploit chain operates within a fully encrypted, highly trusted, and organizationally sanctioned web session. Defense stacks that rely on origin reputation and email telemetry are blind to threats cloaked in institutional trust. Phase 4 is execution on the endpoint. This historically relied on exploit-based variants, where attackers utilized unpatched zero-day vulnerabilities in browsers or third-party plugins to trigger silent drive-by downloads. However, as browsers have become harder to exploit, attackers increasingly utilize a persuasion-based execution path. They present the target with fake browser updates or click-fix dialogues. These prompts impersonate legitimate enterprise security software, such as Cisco AnyConnect or FortiClient. These prompts mimic the legitimate friction employees experience daily. They trick the user into solving a fake CAPTCHA or error by copying a malicious command directly into their own Windows Run dialog. By convincing the user to manually authorize the action using sanctioned system tools, the attacker bypasses endpoint detection logic and achieves initial access. This analysis by the Center for Security Studies highlights Phase 5, Application. We see these exact evasion mechanics deployed as strategic weapons in volatile geopolitical theaters, particularly in Southeast Asia. State-sponsored groups, including China-aligned actors and Vietnam's APT-32, frequently utilize watering hole attacks to quietly monitor the communications and movements of regional adversaries. This stands in contrast to patriotic hacking methods, like distributed denial-of-service attacks and website defacements, which are designed to garner public attention. This aerial view of a military airstrip on a disputed island shows the physical reality of these tensions. This cyber activity is driven by intense physical friction on the ground, specifically ongoing territorial disputes and rapid island-building initiatives across the South China Sea. This image of a Coast Guard vessel firing a water cannon illustrates the risk of escalation in a heavily militarized zone. Loud, destructive cyber attacks carry severe risks. A highly visible disruption could easily cross the threshold and provoke physical military responses. The silent, highly selective nature of a watering hole attack makes it optimal for tracking defense contractors and maritime logistics without triggering an international incident. It provides state actors with an asymmetric advantage. It yields maximum intelligence gathering while preserving total plausible deniability. To counter this architecture of evasion, organizations must address the core structural problem. Relying on historical web reputation is a fatal flaw when attackers hijack trusted domains. Modern defense requires a transition from origin-based trust to zero-trust browsing architecture. This involves technologies like browser isolation, which physically separates web code execution from the local endpoint, containing any potential exploit in a remote sandbox. It also requires continuous external security validation. Defenders must actively map and hunt for staged malicious infrastructure in the wild, identifying compromised supply lines before an employee makes contact. Organizations must assume that all external web infrastructure is potentially hostile, structurally containing all browser activity, regardless of the domain's reputation. As AI-driven email security systems become increasingly proficient at identifying and eliminating traditional phishing lures, attackers are rapidly pivoting their access strategies. The web browser is positioned to replace the inbox as the primary battleground for initial network access. Protecting third-party browsing paths from drive-by compromises is the next critical frontier for security operations teams. True defense in depth is no longer limited to guarding the internal perimeter. It requires proactively securing the external spaces where your people inevitably have to go.